Hello and welcome to the Bubb Report. We first take this time to wish all mothers across Grenada and the expat Grenadian community a happy Mother's Day. This is also an especially difficult day for those who lost mothers at different points in their lives. We remember these families as well. This week on our program, we have a quarterly review of the major stories that are helping to define the 2021 year in Grenada and in the Caribbean. We sit with a panel of independent journalists in Grenada to examine issues around the 4% dispute with the government, tourism infrastructure and tensions with environmental preservation, vaccine hesitancy, the lingering impacts of COVID-19 on the economic health of Grenada, the La Soufrière volcano, and so much more. We also reflect on the Castro legacy on the Caribbean landscape in the wake of Raul Castro's decision to step down as the head of the Cuban Communist Party in Havana. Castro is one of the last surviving members of the historic generation that brought a socialist revolution to the country. We welcome our guests, Dexter Rose, former Vincentian envoy to Havana, entrepreneur and independent journalist Kitaka Mawuto, Beverly Sinclair of Island Media Marketing and Communication, and Callistra Faria, independent journalist. It's the week of May 9th, 2021. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined by Ambassador Dexter Rose. He was a former attaché to Havana, Cuba, representing the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Ambassador Rose, welcome to the Bubb Report.
Thank you, Mr. Bubb. Thanks for calling on me. I don't know who would have fooled you into thinking I have anything sensible to say.
Well, well, I have my sources. Let's just put it that way. But what we want to do, Ambassador, we know that we've seen well, not the resignation, but it was a planned demitting of office of Raul Castro, who was the head of the Cuban Communist Party. Really,
But
what that meant was that it really signaled the end of the Castro era in Cuba and the Caribbean. Now, you also, I believe, studied in Cuba. So could you give us some background with respect to your relationship with Cuba?
well, I've got a long relationship with Cuba. Matter of fact, I come out of a family that has been political. My elder brothers were both unabashedly to the left, and we were always. I grew up in a home where hearing about Cuba, hearing about the Cuban Revolution was nothing strange. My brothers were members of the St. Vincent Cuba Friendship Society. My eldest brother, particular Renwick Rose, who in 1979, he was one of the free leaders of what came to be known as the United People's Movement in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. That was the party that took scholarships and sent the first free Vincentians to study in Cuba. So we had a relationship before that. The parties in the left always had relationships with the Communist Party of Cuba. Those are the days when police were want to approach him on his house and seize copies of the Grandma newspaper and that kind of ridiculous kind of thing, But so I
Right,
so
and
I,
you also
Mhm.
had the non-aligned movement at the time in the 80s at the height of the Cold War as well.
Well, yeah, we can come to that. So the first set of students went to Cuba, and three of them, Dr. Douglas Slater, who is now Assistant Secretary General at CARICOM. There was Andreas Wickham, who was now St. Vincent and the Grenadines' ambassador to Venezuela, and another gentleman, Berwin King, who studied agronomy. Those were the first ones. You were going to Cuba in an atmosphere back then when, although the Grenada Revolution, Maurice and the New Deal movement had triumphed in March, our party was very close to the New Deal movement. But yet, when guys were saying that they were going to Cuba, it was like, well, you sure? I mean, a matter of fact, I can tell you personally, I had been living in New York for just about a year when I was called and asked if I wanted to go to Havana to study. Man, palm trees flashed in my head, and it's strange. And within 2 weeks, I was back in St. Vincent. A week later, I was in Cuba. We were so utopian in thinking back then that I remember my parents were on their way to New York. We're regular West Indians. We travel up and down, all the family there. And I remember in the airport in Barbados where we had to catch a flight to Havana. I remember giving my mother all the US money I had. I said, I'll be okay, I'm going to Cuba. In fact, we were okay. We went there, and the Cuban scholarships then, the first you did a preparatory year where you learned Spanish. You had to learn Spanish before you went into thing. So the first 3 months of that course, you were doing conversational Spanish. Yo soy one, yo me llamo one, usted como se llama, that kind of thing. Which after 3 months, because I was going to study journalism, and I'm the only Vincentian who has ever studied journalism in Cuba. Because I was doing that, you had started introducing us to grammar, Spanish grammar, to literature, importantly to the history of Cuba. Right, that prepared you for first year in university. First year in university, now that's when the heavy stuff is dropped. You start doing a whole lot of grammar, a whole lot of writing, composition. You learn all the elements of journalism in the first 3 years. I mean, you're doing a whole lot of economics. You did philosophy, of course, as any sensible university in the world does philosophy. And one thing that stood out is that the Cubans, even since we were learning Spanish, they would always ask you, why are you studying? And there was a standard dialogue they had. Why are you studying journalism? And then the answer was, I'm studying journalism because my country needs journalists to develop the country. Someone who's doing agronomy, why are you studying agronomy? Because my country needs. It was never so that we can export more revolution throughout the region. It is always about developing the Caribbean. It's all
Well,
about developing.
I'm sure Ronald Reagan had other ideas about that,
Ronald Reagan never,
about just that Cuban influence on the rest of the region, as
Ronald,
Grenada learned the
yeah,
hard way.
Ronald Reagan would not have understood what's happening. I mean, I don't think he understood before or after what was happening. But I mean, the Americans are not really people who understand a whole lot about world politics anyway. But I digress, So it was basically that kind of thing. So graduated from there and I came home, and it was an interesting experience let's start by living there. Living there, it was an environment where you were living among students from all around the world, because Cuba, so you were living there meeting face to face with Namibian students, South African students, because that's them is still apartheid. Cuba was involved in the anti-apartheid struggle. Cubans actually shed blood for the liberation of South Africa. And interestingly, it's not that anybody tells you that, but the thing about Cuba is that while they were there, because Fidel would always share to his population, it would always teach the population the links, the historic links Cuba had with Africa. Because historically, slavery lasted longer in Brazil and Cuba than in the English-speaking Caribbean. And that gave rise to some practices you see in Cuba, which was startling for a person like me. Practice of the syncretic religion, that kind of thing. We could speak hours about that, right?
Yeah.
So we met there. I was studying with Palestinians, with Koreans, people from Cape Verde Islands, from all over Africa, and you're living in the same dorms. You're sharing the same rooms. We slept in bunks. It was no luxury. It was what I always explain. It was a no frills existence. There was all this food. You had 3 meals a day, and you had a stipend, monthly stipend of 60 Cuban pesos a day, which allowed us to do all kinds of things. The most expensive part of that spend was a 3-minute call back home to your parents, your loved ones, that would cost 20 pesos of that 60. And that 3-minute call, very often you had to stay in line a day or two. You go and you ask who's the last person on queue, and you go back periodically. You go back every couple hours, and you realize you got to ask, make sure you know who was in front of you and who was behind you. So you go and sleep somewhere, go and get something to eat. It was that. Those years of the 80s were really the greatest years of the Cuban Revolution. In terms of that, there were heavily supported by the Soviet bloc, the Comecon bloc, that back when the Soviet Union still existed. There was everything in the supermarkets. We as students, before we came home on vacation, we would actually shop before we came home. I know that would surprise a lot of people. I would come home and tell people about Cuba, and they would look at me like, nah, you're talking nonsense. You're lying, you know?
Right.
But those were the glory days. And even today, Cubans will tell you, when Cubans learn for what they yearn for before, they yearn for the days of the 80s. Because most Cubans are younger than the guys, the Fidel and the guys who came down from the Sierra Maestra, who, you know, most Cubans yearn for the period of the 80s. The arts were flourishing. I mean, I fell in love there and got married to a beautiful African Cuban woman, you know. She's darker than you. I said that because sometimes when people think of Cubans, they always think of the mulatto or the lighter skinned people.
Correct, and that is a reality in Latin America. I think race is somewhat rendered invisible, right? As a classification, if you think about it. I mean, we look at the reality in Brazil and the way that they tend to not really see race as a construct, right? But it's
Yeah.
there. It's very present, you know. So now we will segue into Raul Castro.
Uh-huh.
Now he is demitted office as the head of the Communist Party, which brings to an end the era of the Castros, if you will. Certainly, some may say that he may still have an outsized influence with respect to just his role in advising the future leadership of the party. But can you reflect on and speak about his legacy as head of the Communist Party and really influencing geopolitics in the Western Hemisphere?
Well, one cannot talk about Raul without talking about Fidel, because they're really inseparable. Persons who try to divide them, and persons need to understand the system that operates in Cuba. It's a one-party system, but where the Communist Party, the party dictates policy. The government carries out the policy of the party. So the party Congress would decide what major projects are going to be carried out over the next 5 to 10 years. Very often they plan in 5 or 10-year cycles. Unlike us in the English-speaking Caribbean that simply sometimes don't plan. You know, we operate, you get elected and you try to do some things, and if you win the next election, you know, or if the other party changes, there's no continuity whatsoever. A recipe for what we know sometimes very often is disastrous. You know. So in Cuba you have that level of stability. Those who criticize it have the right to criticize it, but give you a level of stability in that you know along the way what's going to happen. So the entire program of the Cuban Revolution was started from the guys Fidel and those guys who came down from the Sierra Maestra. Raul was always second to Fidel, along with Che Guevara, Juan Almeida Bosque, who was a black commander, musician also, journalist. You know, and so that program was well. When Fidel got sick, it was no surprise to anybody that Raul would step into the role of first secretary of the party. He never took the position of commander in chief. As a matter of fact, in party meetings and party congresses, it would be interesting. You would see the chair that Fidel used to use empty on the dais. That was reserved the commander in commander in chief as always Fidel, and then they called him the historic leader of the revolution. So when Raul assumed the role of first secretary of the party and then the presidency of the country, the Cuban party always talks about continuity. So you didn't expect Raul to make any drastic changes, right? But that period coincided with the period just before Barack Obama took office in the United States. And a lot is said about Obama's influence and what Obama's done. But even before Obama came there, Raul Castro had begun a series of reforms. He's the one who had announced that Cuban leaders should not be in office for more than 10 years. A lot of persons would be surprised to know that. So he, in fact, pronounced on his imminent departure down the road. You know, he wasn't going to stick around like some other politicians we know. he was going to stick around like his brother did before, right? So there was a period of reforms embarked upon in Cuba, and those marked Raul's era. A lot they started experimenting with some nascent private sector, but Cuba's full of euphemisms. They don't want to call it private sector. Like Cubans object to
Or
person.
capitalist, I mean, you
No, not the capitalists. You don't talk about state capitalism. This,
right.
they still stick that the state, the party would set the broad policy. The state would be the engine of growth, very different to other countries. But then they would allow some reforms. So they started allowing people to open their own restaurants. In the beginning, they call them paladares from like the palates, right? So you allow people to do restaurants. You start allowing people like persons, artisans to do their own business, plumbers to operate in their own. Because really, in my opinion, with all due respect to the Cuban Revolution, I think the guys went overboard in terms of not letting these type of professions function independently. There's some professions which really our experience in the Caribbean has taught us that just function better when you're working on your own, when you're working for your own money. You're driven by the need to make more. Cuba sort of frowns on that. So you started allowing people to open some little stores, and people then they bring in cloth, and find seamstresses and tailors start making clothes to sell. I wore a lot of the clothes. But the reality is that you always had this thing bug in the Cuban Revolution, that the Cuban Revolution has always had suffered an economic blockade. Some people at times glorify the advances the Cuban Revolution has made in spite of the blockade. But I remember in a conversation, my own Prime Minister, Raul Castro, was there, and he mentioned to Fidel, he said, look, Fidel, like, basically, I'm not quoting him, I'm just paraphrasing. You guys have done so well in spite of the blockade. If you hadn't had the blockade, you probably wouldn't have advanced this way. And Fidel turned to him and said, yes, but I don't want any other country to suffer the way we suffer. And the Cubans, even today, continue to suffer. Just today, I made a Facebook post where I said it's about time for Cubans to breathe, to be able to breathe. The United States fought a war with Vietnam, Communist Vietnam. Communist Vietnam is today given most favored nation status. Communist China is the major trading partner for the United States. No matter how they run up and down and complain and all of that, but that is so. Saudi Arabia, if you're talking about multi-party democracy, Saudi Arabia doesn't have any parties. It's run by
It's a theocratic state, really.
It's a family-run enterprise.
Yeah.
It's a family-run enterprise, and nobody questions that because Saudi Arabia has money. And sadly, in this world, if you got money, you're exempted from criticism and all kinds of things because you got money. You don't ask you how you get it. So Raul's legacy has been that. Now, Raul never had the overarching personality, the sort of charisma that Fidel had, and I don't think he ever tried it. He's a person. I've had some personal experiences with him. Luckily, I'm much more fortunate than a lot of ambassadors in that Ralph Gonsalves used to come to Cuba a whole lot during his first 50 guy. He gave those to me. He's that kind of person, very light-hearted, very unlike the image that is very, very often portrayed of him. He is a typical Cuban. He likes to have fun. He doesn't like a lot of protocol. Fidel, while he was head of the army, but he doesn't like a lot of protocol, and he would, even the way he speaks, I mean, he was not like Fidel. He's not an orator. He didn't attempt to be an orator. He said what he had to say, and he's gone. Fidel would talk for 6 hours. Fidel would engage you in conversation for hours. And I've been fortunate to be in a conversation like that with Fidel and Dr. Gonsalves. I remember, I can say, if you permit me, I remember one Valentine's Day, we had a visit to his office, to the presidential palace, and he took us into what I call his laboratory. Because, Cuba had this big energy program where it's all about saving energy. So he had all these different size pots. and he would reel off for you which pot has the best convection, which is best to use because the heat spreads best in that, and what refrigerator spends, is best for use, and because that kind of thing. And I remember
From you, final thoughts
yeah,
about the
yeah.
future of Cuba in the context of Caribbean, Cuba-Caribbean relations.
Okay. Yes, well, Cuba has always been a partner to the CARICOM countries.
Mm-hmm.
Cuba continues to be a partner. Matter of fact, one might sometimes ask, how come Cuba never joined CARICOM? I think the Cuban government deliberately didn't join CARICOM because they understood the geopolitical issues, and they did not want to put the CARICOM in a funny position. But strangely enough, for a country which is not a member of CARICOM, Cuba has given more assistance to CARICOM than a whole lot of countries in very meaningful ways. Principally let's talk about the human resources development of our region.
Mm-hmm.
Cuba stands unparalleled. Cuba is the place that we go to study and we return to our countries to develop. We've got ministers of government from Grenada all over the Caribbean. Yeah, they study in Cuba. A lot of our persons, when we go to the US to study, the best brains are bought off from the get-go. So the US doesn't invest in us, but takes creams off the best of us. Cuba's assistance and relationship with the Caribbean has been one of a true partner. Cuba doesn't have any investments in the Caribbean. They've got their doctors and nurses and engineers working, helping to develop our infrastructure, our healthcare. We learn so much from them. Raul Castro continued his legacy, continued his brother's example in this kind of way of assisting us, and this continues. And Cuba has shown us that, and sometimes I think, as having served there 10 years as an ambassador, I think very often if we in the CARICOM region followed a lot more what Cuba does with very little to develop its country, we would be a lot better off, rather than the way we fight each other in a sort of endless tribalism that takes you down a road to nowhere. Cuba continues to be a big brother. I'm very proud of the relationship personally I've had with Cuba and the Cuba's had with us. I think it's an example, and Cuba's been a leading member of the non-aligned movement, which we didn't go into. The non-aligned movement, and you hear like person like my Prime Minister Ralph saying that we are sort of paraphrasing what Errol Barrow before him had said. We are friends of all. We are friends of all. We are one. And in the Caribbean, I do believe that we are one Caribbean people. We came here on different ships on a project which was meant to do no good. And sadly, since we got independence, we in our countries see ourselves as separate countries. This is one of the most foolhardy concepts. We are one Caribbean people. The Caribbean single market and economy has been moving too slowly for my own thinking. Our future has to be intrinsically linked together in the Caribbean. And I see Cuba as the big brother of all these countries, whether people like it or not. It has done so much. It has shown us what you can do in the arts, in the sciences. People are waiting on the Cuban vaccines. They've got they started mass vaccinations just on Monday, and the second Abdala second vaccine is on the way. So Cuba has been an example for us, and we can learn a whole lot, and we can continue to learn. Raul Castro's legacy, therefore, he has passed on to a younger generation. That younger generation is talking about continuity and progress. They've got one of the things facing them. Now this internet is rampant in Cuba, which didn't exist before. So they get a lot of feedback from the younger population in terms of the discontent of the population. And I think it's only good that you can fuel them together with a better listening ear in terms of running the country and going forward together.
Okay, Ambassador, this was a very important and enlightening conversation. Viewers and listeners, stay with us. We will be right back. my first day in Cuba, I met Miguel, which really isn't his real name, but was all too eager to speak to me about his vision for Cuba. He was surprisingly opinionated when asked tough questions, considering how free speech is deeply censored on the communist island.
So what do I want to see from Cuba in the next few days?
In the future.
Okay, smart American presidents. That's all I want to see from Cuba.
But American presidents...
Don't count it over here, I know, but they a lot. Not only the Americans, but the Cubans also.
So do you also want to see smart Cuban presidents and smart Cuban leaders in that case?
Oh, they are smart in their own right. I want to see someone.
But does it work for Cuba?
I want to see a female Cuban president. They're all democratically elected here.
Not Raul Castro.
Not Trump. Trump is only elected because he's millionaire. Okay. Unless a U.S. elected president spends billions of dollars on his campaign, I mean, I wish I had. Trust me, I know the U.S. is not a democracy.
Okay. Neither is Cuba. Is it?
Are you sure?
Is Cuba a democracy?
That's why I don't know.
Do they have free presidents?
I voted it over. Do they have free presidents in the
In
States?
Cuba.
No, but they don't have it in the States.
But two wrongs don't make a right, does it?
Are you sure?
No, I'm asking you.
I was very bad at math, but there's no such thing as political math.
Okay, but my question to you is, the revolutionaries, the Castro revolutionaries are now the elite in Cuba.
They are.
Do you want to see that status quo remain?
No, I want to bury them, like go to their graves and like, I'll be pioneros por el comunismo, we'll be like, check. Now we're doing a toast. Salud.
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 Nuestro amigo
You're the only one drinking with two things. Okay, the only merit that Cuba has is that we're tiny, but we got a bunch of heart. The Americans are big and powerful, and they've expanded and conquered first the Indians, the Native Americans, and they've spread throughout the world with their might. Dude, do you know how much the U.S. spends on military? But when the U.S. sends, when there's a crisis in Haiti, the U.S. sends the U.S. Navy. We Cubans send doctors. So when you send the army to kill, we send doctors to heal. So what tells you about the controversy?
Another night has fallen on the fabled Malecon. A deserted waterfront by day becomes alive with the setting sun. People are out in droves, savoring the atmosphere and enjoying each other's company without the impersonal presence of smartphones. On the more affluent side of Old Havana, an American cruise ship is in port, while expat Cubans and tourists attend a rave party. In spite of Cuba's heavy censorship and the deep political freeze that exists between its northern enemy, one gets the feeling that a warming of relations may only happen through people-to-people interactions, open cultural exchanges, and limited internet access. The 1989 destruction of the Berlin Wall, which reunited two ideological enemies in East and West Germany, may never happen between Cuba and the US, not at least in my lifetime. But ordinary Cuban and American citizens are already destroying walls, in spite of promises to build walls between borders by the current establishment in Washington. Okay, folks, so for our next segment, what we want to do is to connect with local journalists on the ground in Grenada who cover a lot of the major issues that impact and affect the socioeconomic development of the country. As you know, the fourth estate, we believe, is one of the beacons of the democratic process. And it is always good to hear from journalists, objective and independent journalists, who can just give us a sense of what is happening on the ground. We are into the fifth month of the year, and what we want to do in this segment is to really talk about ways in which stories sort of are shaping, or shaped rather, the first quarter of 2021. So at this point, I want to bring in Kitaka Mawuto and Beverly Sinclair. Gentlemen and lady, thank you and welcome to the Bubb Report.
Thanks for the invitation, Kellon, and certainly I'm saying hello to all your listeners and your viewers wherever in the world they are.
Absolutely. Kitaka as well, welcome. And so what we want to do, this has been a very eventful 2021, shall we say, so far. In Grenada, we've had the sale of Grenlec, that was big in the news. We continue to have issues with respect to the intractable dispute of the 4% between the government and the teachers and public sector unions. Then we had issues with respect to the banks, and there was some trade union activities there. We have the Dorset Charles, Gemma Bain Thomas issue as well. We also had the elections of the Public Workers Union and the Grenada Union of Teachers. Both unions have new executives in place, and we also want to address things like sex crimes that has been occurring this year as well. And of course, the continued issues with respect to the developments at Lasajas and Livera. So, Beverly, I will start with you. What would you say is perhaps one of the most significant stories for the first quarter of 2021?
It would be very hard, Kellon, to identify any one of those issues that you named, that you just outlined, and say this was the most significant. Certainly, the labor issue resonates with most of the nation. It's labor, it's work, and we are currently in a period where jobs are threatened, jobs have been displaced, jobs have been upended. A lot of people have not worked for more than a year due to the pandemic. So the labor issue resonates with a lot of people. So too the sale of Grenlec. People have been quite apprehensive about that sale. While generally the country agrees that this particular asset should be owned by the people, there is not that confidence in the administration to manage and run the company the way it was as a private enterprise. And we've seen the appointment of a new board, which many people are not happy with because of the people on the board. It's already been said that except for one person who has a history with Grenlec, there is generally no experience, no expertise in managing or running or having anything to do with electricity generation and distribution. So already, there are doubts about the level of efficiency at the level of the board. Of course, the sale of Grenlec itself all had people quite uncomfortable in that the administration up to now has not outlined how it was paid for. We hear that money was moved around from the capital budget for 2020 to pay for this, but we have not yet heard where it was moved from, how much was moved from where. We certainly have not seen any appropriations bill brought before the House. And the Constitution of Grenada just states clearly in Section 77 that if you use money that was not appropriated for a certain expense when the budget was presented, you have to present an appropriations bill for that spending so that it can be recorded in the House and the necessary adjustments can be made. We haven't seen that done, so we still don't know where the money came from, that almost $200 million to pay for the shares. The government had said they would not be holding on to the shares, they would be sold. That was in December. And we are now in May, Kellan, and we haven't heard anything about sale of those shares. So there are a lot of questions still unanswered about this repurchase, this judgment, this court judgment, which led to the repurchase of the sale. And it's not, technically it's not a repurchase, but we use that word for ease of
But
understanding.
it was really a court-ordered settlement, if you will, right?
Exactly,
Based
precisely.
on what that original share purchase agreement was. But Kalistra, you also following that Grenlex story as well, and so how would you say media in Grenada really covered this to bring sunlight to the way that sale was conducted?
Okay, Kellen, thanks for having me on the Bubb Report. Good work. And of my camera is off because I'm trying to stay and with we're still in the dark ages when it comes to internet in Grenada. Although we're the leaders in IT in the Caribbean, so says our Prime Minister. But the Grenlex story, I think media in Grenada was afraid to probe. Like Beverly said, there still are a lot of questions. We're looking at how these stories were handled, and I don't think we sufficiently held government's feet to the fire to provide answers to Grenlec. I mean, we talked about the labor issues and that being a big issue. Yes, it's been a long and protracted issue in the country. For me, Grenlec is the biggest story because it impacts every single person in the country. What's going to happen next with Grenlec? How is it going to impact on electricity rates? How is it going to who is going to eventually own the companies? Government planning to sell it back. There were a lot of rumors about where the money came from, really, and how government was going to dispense with the shares once they got their hands on it. People are also worried about generation capacity. Are we going to go back to the dark days of blackouts? And I don't think that sufficient questions were asked. The government gave the impression when this was a talk that Grenlec was in that we would begin to see load shedding. Now I looked into that. I went into that aspect of it by interviewing people at the power plant and interviewing people in management. What I discovered that was not the case. Grenlec was really not on its legs when it comes to generation capacity, and they had an adequate amount of backup capacity. They did not sufficiently question the government on a lot of what they were saying about Grenlec. We simply just took it, reported on what they said, and did not offer the story behind the story of Grenlec.
Without doing that follow up, okay. And Kitaka, I'm going to bring you on here. Were you following the Grenlex story?
Yes, I followed. Um, in my view, I agreed with Scalistra and Beverly in terms of, I mean, you had a show last week about media and so on, and we saw the softness of our journalists in terms of being able to really be investigative, go beyond what is in a press release, go beyond what is said in a propaganda piece, and really dig deeper. And so there's a lot of ambiguity sometimes, a lot of rumors on the streets, and a lack of clarity on issues. And so sometimes we get very distracted and we don't really see the bottom line. For me, I mean, obviously for me, I like, and I would feel happier to know that, Grenadians have a majority share in the company and own energy generation. Because for me, I think having outside interests have a strong influence or have majority share in your energy generation is a serious national security issue. There's the lack of transparency and having things be out in the open really bothers me sometimes, because in Grenada, we speak about things for a week when it's hot, and then that issue has not been spoken about in a very long time. We only speaking about it now because the board members were mentioned. So I think we really need our journalists to Calistra, maybe to go deeper to really get some more information. Of course, what's the status with the shares? When would I be able to buy some shares? What's the status with some of the equipment that Mr. Bowen spoke about, that was, dilapidated and close to being down to ruin, as in, to try to quote his own words. So for me, yeah, I think definitely there is a need for more investigation to really bring light to those issues, so we can really have everything on the table. As it stands now, things are not clear, very ambiguous, and so rumors are about.
Another story here. We really want to talk about the 4%, the protracted union government back and forth with respect to the 4%. Kitaka, that story seems to continue to linger on, really, because government seems to have really dug their heels in, notwithstanding the fact that there is an agreement in place. How have you been covering that story? Kitaka, I will start with you and then I go to Beverly.
Well, I mean, with that, with the 4% story, I mean, it's very interesting because it takes me back to a couple of years ago when I was actually a teacher, and there was the gratuity and pension issue and the docking of salaries. So I think this is also a lingering of that as well. That bad blood from that point up until now, and then having an agreement being made and not honoring that agreement. And I mean, the people on the union side are adamant that the government is finding money to continue to run the social programs, continue to um, buy background lek and many other things they are pointing to in terms of monies that are being found to do things, as opposed to honoring the 4%. How I feel about this, Kellan, I think serious investment needs to go into the teachers, and the morale of the teachers is very important. I mean, if I was in the position of the prime minister or the government right now, I would pay that 4% and figure it out afterwards. Because you don't really want to have this situation go on longer within the whole COVID situation. I mean, education is in a very unstable state right now with the whole COVID-19 lockdown, on e-learning, the lack of devices, internet connectivity. Like the classroom is all over the place, and to have industrial action be thrown into the mix, it really doesn't really help the overall situation. But for me, sometimes I feel like the trigger is pulled a little bit too early in terms of the unions. Like you need a gradual build up to really force the hand of the government. So we have a situation where you strike a bit, you protest, then you have to renege a bit, then you do a sick out. I think some more strategy should go into it, and
Right.
to really be more successful in really bringing the government to a serious table to say, okay, we are going to pay you that 4%. As always, for me, how stories are covered in Grenada, it's interesting because the journalists here. I'm thinking about maybe having a newspaper open, an agency soon, and getting some journalists to really be brave and go beyond, and really ask questions to the both sides to really get them to really come forward, because we hear a lot of rhetoric, and so now we don't pressure the rhetoric enough to get the substance.
And what is the follow up, right? That there isn't no follow up, as you said, as what we are trying to do here. I mean, and it would appear that yes, you have to be, as news, you have to be reactive, but you also have to ensure that you're following up on these stories. That is the essence of journalism. And Beverly, I will bring you. Kitaka, is there something else you wanted to add?
Oh no, Beverly can come in now.
Yes, Beverly, on the
Yes,
continued dispute with government and unions.
that issue of the 4%, I mean, Kellen, we could walk through it and highlight so many things that are wrong. That would be very easy to do. I believe it is quite an embarrassment on the face of the administration that you sign an agreement, you started paying in 2020, which means you acknowledge and honor the agreement. And then come 2021, without proper dialogue with the other party, you just get up and say you can't pay. And this is where I think everything started going downhill. Not only the fact that government has said it cannot pay in the face of spending lots of money elsewhere, making promise to the airport recently to give 1 million a month to support, where that 1 million a month is just about the amount that would be needed to pay the public servants the increase. 30 million for traffic lights, which quite frankly, Grenada, we've been doing without traffic lights for years now. So what is the urgency of putting in these
Well,
lights. And
except the government may say about the traffic lights that agreement has not been finalized again, and we don't know what the final amount will be. Is that the
but they
case,
have
Beverly?
announced
Uh-huh.
figures for
Okay.
putting in the traffic lights.
Okay.
You see, so I don't know how they could have announced a figure if the agreement has not been settled.
Mm-hmm.
So all these expenses, these big money expenses are announced, and at the same time you're going to say you don't have money to pay the public servants, and the dialogue is not there. You have not engaged. You have an agreement between two parties, and one party realize they cannot keep up to their end of their agreement. The first thing to do is to call the other party and enter dialogue and see how this thing can be resolved. Instead, public statements are made. The public workers have been called all kind of names out in the public. There has been this aggressive movement to set up the nation against the public workers. It's divide. It's always making them out to be monsters and to be greedy instead of sitting down and having a dialogue with them because you have an agreement in place with them. So talk to them, and all of this has made it very ugly. And like I said before, put the government in a very embarrassing situation with the industrial action now. If the government this comes up and pays and say, okay, let's pay, how is it going to look after they have dug in their heels and said they can't pay? But they have to do something because the nation is in unrest over this 4% issue. And Kellon, social media and people in general are talking more about it than the traditional media. You see angles of this 4% issue coming out in various different quarters, but not
Mm-hmm.
in the mainstream media. And we
Mm-hmm.
really have a very timid media in Grenada. They don't want to publish hard hitting stories. And I don't believe a lot of time it's because they don't have information or they don't have leads, but they just don't publish because the media in Grenada, to me, is very timid and just not bold enough to do what the fourth estate is supposed to do, which, to use a cliche, is to afflict the comforted and to
Mm-hmm.
comfort the afflicted. They,
Correct.
they, they
That
just,
is the role of journalism. Kitaka, did you want to
exactly,
add anything to what Beverly is saying there about?
Well, I mean, a point that comes to me as well in terms of the whole union 4% issue. I think it appears to me that the government and employers don't respect the unions. Also, I was at the May Day rally. It was lukewarm. It was, I mean, what is a union without that comprehensive and commanding support of the workers?
Mm-hmm.
To me, I feel like the gratuity issue with the dark salaries was a serious thing that really affected a lot of workers and made them a bit afraid to really like drum their support behind the union, because you need the workers to drum their support behind the union to put any kind of pressure on the government to make them think twice and lose sleep at night. As it stands right now, I don't think the prime minister or the government is losing sleep at night based on the energy that's coming from the union. So I would definitely say that if the teachers and so on really see it as a major issue, like they have to drum up that support with the union, and the union, I mean, I made a post about this recently. I think the union also suffers from not being consistent with other issues that are being faced on a regular basis with the workers. So then you don't have that base and that camaraderie and that connection going on and that synergy building in the union and that momentum that you can then use in instances like that to amp up the pressure. As it stands now, a few loud voices are being amplified on the media and so on, but that commanding force of 10,000 teachers is not really there. And I think that is a missing ingredient to tip the scale to make the
Mm-hmm.
government, like be like, okay, we have to pay that money.
Mm-hmm. But because, as you said, Kitaka, they are intractable. They're not moving. I mean, they've dug their heels in, and they said it's going to be the end of the year, and that's the end of that.
Also, the contract work issue as well
and
too. A lot of workers are on contracts.
Mm-hmm.
And that uncertainty of their labor status within the COVID-19 situation is also something that's affecting them and making them be a little bit hesitant to go out in a rally full 100 or to put on their red jersey or to actually expose themselves, even though they are on the side of wanting that 4%, but being on a contract and having to come and sit down and look at the employer maybe next year, maybe in a couple months to renew,
Right.
is also very, like a noose to the neck.
Beverly? Beverly, I think we
Yeah.
go
And
ahead. Go ahead.
what about your point? Yes, what you said about that payment in December is another sore point because the government on its own came up with this, and it's not a promised payment date either. We need to bear that in mind. It's not like the government said, okay, on the 15th of December, we will make the payment. What it has said is something to the effect that, we'll see what happens come December. And it is not something which was agreed on by both parties. So there is this level of disrespect with the unions, as Kitaka pointed out, where the administration just does things and says things without any dialogue or agreement with the unions and just put it out there and say, well, this is what we're going to do, this is what is going to happen. And that is not how you behave when you have respect for the party that you're engaging. So that has become another sore point. The unions, I am sure they have their internal issues because they need the members of the union. I don't believe a lot of them understand what the struggle, as it is called, is all about. They believe the struggle is against an administration and don't realize that the struggle is against a system. If these problems cannot be fixed, Helen, all of our children and our grandchildren and maybe the next 3, 4 generations, they are all going to be fighting for the same thing. And how does that make sense? So you have to fix the system. And I believe the members of the union, those who are fighting against, they need to get with the program and wake up and recognize that it is a system which is in place that you need to change. You have to change the system, or else you'll forever be struggling and fighting. And how many of those people in the union want to see, maybe when you're old and retired, you want to see your children and your grandchildren out there with placards out there in the street fighting for
Doing
the
the
same
same thing that you were doing, right?
Yes, that you should have fixed when you were able to, but you didn't because some petty issues inside the union you think is more important than working together as a team to fix the system.
Kalistra, I'm going to see if we can get you back here. And what we were having a discussion there on the 4%, the 4% issues with respect to government and unions, and both Beverly and Kitaka made the point that government doesn't really, they're not really paying attention to what these demands are, notwithstanding that the unions have been engaging in a protracted protest on the ground in Grenada. You've covered this issue, and so let us hear your reflection on the way that we in the media are shining light on that issue.
We've looked at the 4%. We've said the union says the government can pay. The government says no, we can't pay. The deeper issue, the cost, the long-term cost to the country on this. What are the changes that we need to make that will make the public sector useful to the nation? The cost of running the public sector is high, but we need to report on the cost benefit situation of the public sector. Because let's face it, the public sector is a cost on the people of the country. You get your 4%, and we focus on the 4%, but there's 170 something thousand people possibly in Grenada who, the majority of them probably work. And they're not getting raise increases. And we're looking at that labor issue as if it's an issue that, they benefit to the economy with more money in the economy is one argument. But this is just a few thousand people to whom the taxpayers have to bear the cost. But if we look at this, the public sector is costing us a lot and we are not getting back the returns. in my opinion, we're not getting back the returns. And I think we need to, when covering this, we need to look a little deeper at the whole picture, not just the government's legal obligation. And right now, the legal obligation, and they need to meet it. This is the landscape that exists now. Some long-term reflection on this general situation needs to take place, or else we will be stuck with a public sector that takes more than it gives and continues to be a constant burden on state coffers. So we need to look at that aspect of it, the economic cost to the country, for keeping
And
the
of
public
course,
service
and of course,
running.
right.
Now.
Yeah, the labor unions would say to you, look, we also contribute and stimulate the economy, right? Because the increases that they would be receiving, certainly they would say that it goes back into the economy, thus stimulating economic development.
The entire
Callisto?
spending population is contributing to it.
Mm-hmm.
I am here. The entire working population is contributing to the economy. Everyone who has a job and goes to the supermarket is contributing, but not everyone who is contributing is being, their ability to do so is not the bill is not being put by the taxpayers. And we need to look at that. There's a long-term cost to the country.
We will move on to the next issue here, and that has to do with the projects at both Lasajes and Livera. As we know, government is moving ahead with that. There was some resistance there with respect to concerns that civil society expressed, especially at both projects, really. The fact that the EIAs were not necessarily very independent, and sort of the opaque fashion of approving both projects. Beverly, have you been covering that story?
Well, I have been following what has been happening. And even before I make any comment on the construction and everything, I asked the question, Kellon, who really are our elected representatives representing? Who do they represent? I hear constituents quite upset, I hear constituents asking questions. I hear the cries of the people in the constituency, but I don't see a representative addressing those people, speaking with them, answering their concerns, and being a true representative of the people. It seems like the people are only important on election day. Go and vote for me with a string of promises. And when times like this come, when they need representation from their elected representative, it's just not there. And it's a serious problem we are having in the politics of our countries, where people vote for parties and do not get representation. Here it is now. You have an investor that comes in, and as usual, the details of what we as a country have agreed to with this investor is not even known. It is state property that's being handed over, and the nation in general is not made privy to these agreements, how much is being handed over for how much, whether it's a lease, whether it's a sale. You don't have these details being put out there in the public for people to know, but it is state property. So the question, if you ask the question now, who owns the property in Lasajes? I don't think any ordinary Grenadian could answer that question to say who owns it. So these are issues that go beyond even how people feel about what is happening there. And how they feel is built upon the fact that you see heavy equipment coming in, ripping away mangroves, seemingly destroying the environment right before your eyes, tearing down things that are supposed to provide protection to the coastline. And of course, people are going to be concerned. And then again, you have the Prime Minister now sit down and calling these people all kinds of names that are totally unnecessary. And sometimes I hear the Prime Minister and other people in elected positions and leadership positions in the country speak so condescendingly of the people they are supposed to be serving and representing. It kind of makes you wonder what is their thought process when you sit before these people who elected you and speak of them and speak to them in that kind of manner. They want answers, that's all they want. So I have been following what's happening up there. And what we see is that this is supposed to be another huge tourism development. Despite everything that has happened with COVID 19, there has been no change, absolutely no change in our approach to tourism.
Well, for me, what jumps out, Kellan, is land policy. And for us to really sit down, because remember, we are very small. So the little land that we have to use it to the best of our ability. So we have to have land policy to govern and say, okay, these parts of our country, based on how vital it is for the natural ecosystem and habitat and everything to work properly, cannot be destroyed to put concrete because it serves a greater and a more important role to the overall functionality of the island. So we have to create zones where developments of that nature can actually happen. Even in my opinion, I mean, I feel as well we have to actually move away from even that kind of level of tourism. I think there's more to be had in our community-based tourism, education-based, in rural communities, decentralized from a particular location where you increase waste, you increase so many other things and impact on the environment. Also as well, I think these decisions is showing us that, like the country, the government may be very cash strapped, and these things are a desperate way to raise funds because many of those projects are tied to the citizenship by investment program. So for me it shows that okay, we have some issues in generating revenue. So my thing is, like, right now, I mean, COVID showed us that a lot can be had from the digital world. Even right now I am able to work from home. I think we are not tapping into the digital space enough. Maybe that's something that we can do, where we can put some investment there. It does nothing to the environment, and we can bring in that level of finance and create that level of jobs and so on that we want to, because that's the argument that the government is putting forward, creating jobs and bringing development to the areas like St. David's that never had a major development like that. Six Sense is a big brand. I mean, Livera, same thing, northern part of the island, bringing jobs and bringing development. So for me, as I said, land policy critical for us to have some sort of legal framework that could be there to prevent people who come in with money and influence from just having like being at a buffet in terms of land in the country and choosing our prime spots and creating ecological problems for us, based on putting on concrete in certain areas. We are 133 square kilometers. We have to safeguard and ensure that each square feet and each square mile is utilized to the best way, and we don't create problems in the future. And also it shows that the government needs to diversify its revenue generation streams. Right now, I mean, tourism has been our backbone. Even without it in COVID, we are still, placing our bets on it and hoping that we are going to reopen soon. But I think, that's still us putting all our eggs in one basket. So definitely we have to look at tech. We have to look at many other avenues where we can, bring in some revenue into the country, because, all the things that are happening is showing us that, yeah, we need money desperately. And when you're desperate, you're going to do desperate things that you're going to regret tomorrow.
When you're desperate, you will do desperate things that you would regret tomorrow. That's a very interesting way of putting it. Beverly, I don't know if you've been following, but I know that the Grenada land actors, they also brought legal proceedings against the physical planning unit, which I believe is under the Ministry of Finance in Grenada, in which they were requesting a judicial review of decisions. I'm looking at it here. It's saying that the Grenada land actors is requesting that the court review the authorities' decisions in the light of the information on 3 developments that the Grenada land actors has compiled and put before it and to determine whether those decisions accord with the law and the provisions of the Act. Have you been following that that legal action that was brought against physical planning, Beverly?
I have to say, I do not have the details to that action which was filed. I know of it, but I do not have the details to speak
Okay.
to the specifics of it. But in general, I would applaud the land actors for bringing that lawsuit. And I believe that more citizens and more civic groups need to take action whenever they see something that they think is in violation of what it should be, because what has been happening is that our constitution and our laws are being whittled away little by little. You take a little here, you take a little there. And it is what Adolf Hitler says, when you want to take away people's rights, you do it little by little. You don't go in and do it in one big chop. And the laws and constitution in Grenada are slowly and steadily being disregarded. So it is good when civic groups and individuals can identify these things and take action and seek redress through the courts to correct anything which is actually wrong.
And let's get to another big story that has to do with vaccine hesitancy in Grenada. One can say that Grenada has not gotten to the point of full herd immunity, if you will, with respect to the coronavirus. That there still is a lot of vaccine hesitancy. Now, the government has been really doing a lot of public information, but there is also issues with respect to misinformation, and there are also really genuine concerns about the efficacy of the vaccine, especially the what is it now, the AstraZeneca vaccine, which is the one that's available in Grenada. So, Kitaka, I will start with you. What is the feeling on the ground with respect to the vaccine hesitancy? What are those conversations like? What are people's thoughts around that?
Okay, well, the numbers don't lie. I mean, we are not there in terms of, I mean, I think the last time I heard was about 12,000 in terms of
Yeah.
the population. On the ground, the reality is this. I mean, Grenada experience of COVID-19 is not as a reality of, let's say, the United States, India, and many other countries. Like, the average Grenadian has not seen anyone fall down or go to the hospital and die. They have not seen any hospitals being crowded and lack of
Hmm.
oxygen. So that reality of COVID is not really wired into our experience. I think apart from the misinformation, that also, adds to people seeing like we don't really need it like that, because the fact we have been here for a very long time living, and even right now you go to St. George's and the majority of people are walking around without masks. That could be very risky if you ask me, based on the COVID-19 is still out there. But the reality is, because COVID didn't hit home like that, people are hesitant. Also, there's a large percentage who have been victims of a lot of the conspiracy theories, a lot of the anti-vax information that has been pumping around social media and so on for a while. Most people are saying, one, there's a large percentage of people who are saying, they wait to see the effects. Because even for me personally, I mean, looking forward, like there is the absence of long-term study to show, okay, how does it affect someone over 10 years, over 5 years. Some people are saying, they don't have that information. So that's a reason why they may not take it. Others are feeling like they're being coerced to take it or forced to take it based on some of the decisions made by, let's say, the tourism industry and SGU and so on. So there's a lot of combination of things, I think, that are contributing to the hesitancy of it. In my view, I feel like we're going to reach a point very soon where it may have to be mandatory if it continues like that, because I'm not seeing any significant uptick on people like actually going forward to take it. The numbers have been crawling a bit. So let's see what happens. Right now, Kellan, there's a serious issue all over the world where, I mean, we have social media. Everyone is a reporter right now. All you have to do is just click share. So it's a challenge with everything right now. A lot of information is out there flooding, and most people don't have time to really vet or they just go with the very catchy headline and so on. Even the whole blood clot situation with AstraZeneca. I mean, it might be one instance of a blood clot, but it's blown way out, and everyone is like, oh God, it's creating blood clots. And I say to some people who are anti-vax right now, even for me, like I grew up as a Rasta natural and I've not been into all these pharmaceutical drugs and so on. But even people who are claiming to be anti-vax, they eat chicken every day, they eat beef and so on that's pumped with vaccines. So it's like, really need to reach to a point where we can be more clear on stuff. And it's kind of sad right now because a lot of information is flooding us every single day about vaccines and so on. Even with regular drugs right now that's on the shelf. When you do a study, let's say you study 10 people, the drug may affect 6 people well, and that might be enough to pass that drug. There may be 3 people who would have had some severe effects, and maybe 1 person in that same study who would have died. And those drugs are currently on shelves right now. So, I mean, for me, it's been said now that it's our best shot. I mean, I have not been vaccinated. Um, People as yet. I'm not sure if I'm going to be vaccinated as yet either. I'm not sure. Let's see what happens. I mean, there are say people like me is a part of the problem as well. But I have my concerns.
But is there a religious? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but would there be a religious exemption for you
Well,
in the context of Grenada
well,
as a
I'm not.
Rastafarian?
Well, I'm not sure what the law says. But
Okay.
it has been a stance in my family, about vaccines and a lot of things. For me now, as I educate myself, I can understand the science of vaccines, and I say, as I could say, I'm on the fence. So if I'm forced at some point where I have to travel or do some things, I would have to take it, But for now, I have not, taken it as yet. But
Okay.
so those are some of the narratives and issues, that's going on right now in the country.
And Beverly, I will bring you in to piggyback on some of the things that Kitaka mentioned here.
Yes, Kellon. I said it from early in the game that the angle that the health administrators in Grenada took and have taken to speak about the vaccines, it was and it is just wrong. The messaging is all wrong, and the messengers are faces that people don't trust. So that is a big part of the vaccine hesitancy in Grenada. A lot of what is out there that people are calling misinformation, it's not really misinformation, but when you collectively gather up all or a lot of the information about the vaccines, everything is not going to be the same. There will be things that tell you about how well the vaccines work and what they are supposed to do. And you will see information that talk about the adverse effects that have been identified in relation to people who have taken the vaccine. And there is nothing wrong with giving people all the information. Each person's health situation is different. So people need to be properly informed, properly advised, properly counseled if they intend to take the vaccine. And the other big mistake which is being made out there in what we call the information arena, what I call the information arena, is that we keep comparing the AstraZeneca emergency authorization use vaccine with other vaccines, and they're not the same. The AstraZeneca is not yet in the category where you can compare it with a measles vaccine or a smallpox vaccine. It's just not there. It's two completely different products. But in the effort to frighten and coerce and push people to take the vaccine, you're comparing it with a product that it cannot be compared with because they're not in the same category at this stage. So you have to allow the process to work through, answer the concerns that people have. And those who want to take the vaccine will take it, and you will probably see a better uptake. Jamaica ran quite a fantastic campaign to get people vaccinated to the point where Jamaica actually ran out of vaccines. That is how much people were just coming forward to take the vaccine. Nobody was forcing the people in Jamaica to go and take the vaccine. But they ran a campaign, the health authorities ran a campaign which was effective, Kellogg. People went out voluntarily to be vaccinated. But somehow in Grenada and in other islands, I've noticed to come with this brute force and this bullish attitude, threatening people, you have to take it or lose your job. Look at the situation where the Prime Minister of Grenada took himself out of it because he says, I am not making any law to make vaccine mandatory. But if business people say you have to be vaccinated to work there, that is their right. Now, if you are not making a law to make vaccines mandatory, under what law are these business people making it mandatory or making it a condition of people to work? The Constitution gives people a right to work. So if you are going to put that condition on people for them to work, that they should be vaccinated, by what authority are you doing it? When the Prime Minister has declared that he's not making any law to make the vaccine mandatory. But here it is, business owners are free to put measures in place to say you can't work, you can't come on the premises if you're not vaccinated. And then all the other people that have to interact with this business, is it that they are going to have to be vaccinated as well? And we're talking about customers. If you have an establishment where customers have to come in, you're going to stop everybody at the door and ask them if they're vaccinated. So your staff have to be vaccinated, but the people that they have to interact with, how are you going to deal with that?
Yeah, I think that is the current reality in Israel with respect to the sort of vaccine passport schemes. By the way, Israel was able to vaccinate almost all of its entire population. But
Exactly.
Beverly, I would ask you though, with respect to the messaging campaign in Jamaica, what worked in Jamaica that perhaps could be applied to Grenada and other islands in which it's sort of like a top down interventionist framing of the messaging. What are your thoughts on that, Beverly?
Well, what I saw in the messaging in Jamaica was that it very subtly appealed to the people. The message came from ordinary people. And I'm not talking about the way you do it, where you just get somebody who is a popular figure, like a DJ or somebody
A
like
dancehall artist or something.
yes,
Yeah.
and you use them. You didn't see those kind of images in the messages that went out in Jamaica. There was just ordinary people. You have things like a grandchild speaking to a grandparent about vaccination, and they were just things that resonate with ordinary people. And then you had this blitz, it was called a vaccination blitz, and it was properly promoted and encouraged people. The messaging was such that when you listen to it, it was something you wanted to do, not something you feared, not something you ran away from. And even when you heard about the adverse effects, because there have been some situations, even when you heard about the adverse effects, it was not handled in such a way that it would turn you off. It's not like the information was being hidden. Nobody is going to say, oh, this person got sick, but it's not because they take the vaccine. You don't know that. You don't know if it is or if it is not. So just because you want someone to take the vaccine, you cannot openly declare that yes, someone took the vaccine, had some adverse reaction, but you can't say it's the vaccine. No, you can't say it is, but you also cannot say it is not. And you have to identify it and claim it as something that could possibly happen. So these are the things that turn off or make someone feel comfortable. Because if I'm going to use an emergency authorization use product, and there are risks associated, regardless of how small, I could be in that 0.01% that it's going to adversely affect. So I need to know. I need to be informed. I need to take that risk based on my information and not just because you tell me. Most of the people who take it are okay. Good for them. That may not be for me. While there is a percentage chance. So the messaging needs to change. This bullying needs to stop. This forcing of people need to stop. Because when you force people, more and more you hear people saying, it is my right. I have the right of choice. I have the freedom of conscience, according to what is stipulated in the Constitution. And people do have the right of choice. So if they're going to choose to take the vaccine, let it be an educated choice and stop threatening people's jobs, stop threatening people all about. The world is changing. We don't know where it's going to evolve to and how it's going to evolve in living with this pandemic. So, tell on for heaven's sake, they need to just stop frightening and threatening people and do a proper education campaign so that people can understand and make an informed decision.
Hmm. We want to segue into, and I'm going to bring Kitaka back in here now. We want to segue into a conversation on the natural disaster that's just happening up the road from us. Obviously, that volcanic eruption, we've covered it here on the Bubb Report, but it certainly is having ripple effects across the Caribbean. Really, it's not only a St. Vincent story, but it is a Caribbean story. How would you say we've covered this volcano story for the region? Itaka, I will start with you.
Um, I think so. I think we focus heavily on like the actual event of the explosion and the ash and so on. But I think the bigger stories are the other subplots that connect to it. Like let's say for instance, how that volcano is going to affect the agriculture industry because St. Vincent is a serious hub and a serious like the fulcrum of production of agricultural products in the Eastern Caribbean. You know, Grenada, St. Lucia, Barbados, many of the countries benefit from the surplus production in St. Vincent from marijuana come right down. And based on reports in the red zone, which is, you know, the very fertile area in St. Vincent, we had sometimes 100% destruction, you know, and varying levels of destruction as you come down to the orange and other zones. So, you know, how is that going to affect the Caribbean islands in terms of the food security and so on in the coming months? I know some of my friends, you know, and the guys on the ground are expecting the marijuana shortage to hit very soon. Also, for me, an issue that I think this showed up as well is how do we deal with natural disasters on a serious level in the Caribbean? In my honesty, I feel like, you know, the Caribbean's greatest risk is always those natural disasters, be it volcanoes, earthquakes, hurricanes, storms, whatever. And for me, I've seen as a young person growing up where every time it happens, we have to scramble and scamper and try to help, you know, relief efforts, ship barrel up, and so many different things. I think we need to reach to a point now where CARICOM and the Caribbean islands should be paying money into a disaster fund every year, all the time, you know, so that when disaster strikes, we just that disaster fund, whether it's under whatever regional disaster agencies that's there, or whatever, can
Which would
administer
be
those
Sidima, yeah.
Idima can
Uh,
administer those funds and so on. So other countries doesn't have to really, you know, scamper here and there, even in their own, you know, tough situation to find finances and other things to share. I mean, we can fill in the void, but I think for the most part, if all the countries are on board and we're paying consistently into a fund all the time, you know, for rainy days, when it comes, you know, we should have some sort of, you know, infrastructure and financial muscle, you know, to better be able to be there for the people in disaster, you know. But for me, I think there's a lot that will happen and a lot of different stories that can be explored with the whole St. Vincent issue. There's the whole health issue, like what's the long-term effect of inhaling all that ash, you know. Even recently we saw rains coming down and flooding was widespread in some areas. You know, there's a lot of environmental impact to also, you know, like bring to the forefront. So for me, I think it's definitely a lot of things that can be explored and bring to the forefront in terms of the whole St. Vincent story. And even for me, I think I'm planning to go to St. Vincent soon to do a follow up, you know, to see how they progress and so on. Um, I hope I can get some funding to do so, Kellan, and I'll be able to go to St. Vincent to really get the stories from the people on the ground and see how we can bring out some of the information that I just spoke
yeah.
about and how do we progress from where we are to where they need to be and the recovery and so on.
Yeah, and I think Eyewitness News' Kenton Chance has been doing a very good job in documenting those human interest stories because that is a major story there, major stories with respect to how people. We're talking significant portions of the Vincentian population that are impacted by this. And Beverly, I will bring you in now just to reflect on that story as well.
Yes, the humanitarian side of it, I don't believe enough reporting has been done about it. Because from the time when people were told to evacuate, which was just mere hours before the first eruption, that psychological impact on people, that has not been covered and recorded in any way at all that I can see from anywhere. And the whole impact of living in a shelter, living in a shelter for an indefinite period. This is not like a
Yeah.
hurricane where you know the hurricane is going to pass and you go and you
After a
pick up
couple
back
hours, you go
stuff.
back and then you start to pick up
Exactly.
the pieces.
Back home and
Yes.
you start. Yes, you just have to stay in that shelter. And the conditions in the shelter were absolutely not very favorable to people living there, elderly people who have disabilities, to children, to pets, because you're not going to be fleeing a volcano and leave your pets, cats, and your pet dog behind. You're gonna take them with you. So that aspect of the whole eruption of the volcano in St. Vincent, I don't think it was given, or it has been given so far, the kind of coverage that it needs to really look at the impact on people's lives, and the fact that now the alert level has been lowered from red
To
to
orange.
orange,
Yeah.
and the authorities have been saying that they're going to be moving people back into the red zone, to go back into the red zone and to pick up the pieces from there. That is also going to be traumatic on the minds of people when you go back and see the condition of your property, the condition of your house, and to think that you have a volcano there. The fact that it has gone back to sleep, it's not going to comfort you that it's going to sleep for another 20 or 30 or 50 years, because it's there, you know, and it's alive, it's active. So these situations can be very, very traumatic for people. And you have the post-traumatic stress to deal with. People hear a little rumbling now and they get scared, because right away, just the other day when it was raining in St. Vincent, when they had those heavy flood rains, when the thunder was rolling, people were reacting with fear, because everyone was thinking it's the volcano that's erupting again in the midst of the flood. And it was the thunder. So these kind of issues, these kind of impacts, they need to be looked at. And I think it's important to find out from the authorities in St. Vincent what kind of measures are going to be put into place. Where is the expertise going to come from to help these people to settle down psychologically, just as you expect them to settle down physically? They have to get their minds back into gear. There has been such sudden disruption, sudden and serious disruption to their lives, that it will take a lot of effort to get them back to peace of mind and to a stage where they can carry on. And it's not going to happen overnight, Helen. It's going to take time. It's really going to need a lot of effort. A lot of the relief money that has gone into the country need to be spent in this area, and not just in physical rebuilding at all.
To what kind of stories would we be covering in the next quarter of the year?
Well,
What are your predictions, Kitaka?
Well, I mean, we are a couple of years away, about 2 years away from an election, so I think the political scene is going to get very hot very soon. I
Uh-huh.
mean, story of like what's going on with the alternative options to government in Grenada, the other political parties, what's going on there. I mean, I think just now election mood is going to be in full swing.
But
Um,
some may say it already is. I mean,
well,
even before we get to that, I believe the opposition National Democratic Congress in Grenada, they have an upcoming convention. I'm very interested in the tea leaves on that as well. You have some younger folks who are vying for leadership. Kitaka, your thoughts on that?
Well, I would pray. I hope I've been praying, and I hope that the Lord has been answering the prayers, because I mean I think we have been in a very dangerous position of having like not having any kind of a presence of an opposition there. I think you need that for democracy to operate properly. And I think for the most part, the government is very complacent now, and so on, because there's not any other strong force to really hold them accountable and so on. So for me, I think it's high time that a strong, committed, group of younger, more energetic, more innovative people take the helm of the NDC party. So I'm praying and hoping that at this convention we have some massive shakeups where some of the younger guys and girls step up and take some position in the party. I think that would go a long way to really help to strengthen our democracy and to push Grenada in a better direction, in my opinion. So I'll definitely be monitoring that convention in August. SGU coming back as well. How would that work? Would that create the projected reinjection into an economy that we're expecting? How would they handle the whole vaccination situation? How would they handle interacting with the rest of the population who has not been vaccinated? Will the low vaccination rate push back that August timeline that they have announced? I know for instance the real estate industry in St. George's has been struggling significantly with the absence of the students and so on. So I look forward to monitoring the developments with the whole SGU reopening. What else is there? I mean, St. Vincent would be a big story. How does that progress? I mean, I'm aiming to go to St. Vincent at the ending of the year as well to see what's going on. Yeah, I think for me that's some of the big stories.
You and I both. We have some serious work to do in St. Vincent there. Beverly, I'll bring you in the big stories. What shall we anticipate? What can we anticipate in the next quarter of the year?
Yes, I think Grenada is going to be going into high gear as far as election is concerned in maybe a quicker time than the 5 years, based on the mood on the ground and based on the writing on the wall. I believe that Grenada is going to see an election sooner rather than later. We have seen a shifting in the landscape in the opposition voices in Grenada. And I believe as far as that goes, there will be some interesting changes with the coming on scene of the Grenada movement. And that group has certainly signaled that they intend to enter the political fray. And we want to see what
have they though, Beverly? I mean, they have not been been very transparent about their intentions. They're an NGO. They're not a political party. May I finish, Beverly? And I think a lot of Grenadians are a bit wary about that lack of transparency, if you will. Are you going to remain an NGO, or are you going to become a full-fledged political party that will field 15 candidates to run for the next elections? Please proceed.
What I have heard from public utterances is that the NGO is going to evolve as the people want it to. And I have also heard public utterances, nothing that I've heard through any sources, because the chairman of the NGO, that is Dr. Patrick Antoine, he has certainly been on several programs and has been speaking to it. And that is why I can say that TGM has signaled that it intends to enter the political fray. And we want to see what kind of impact that will have on the opposition forces in Grenada, whether or not it will change the landscape and what kind of change it will make to the landscape. The fact that the group is an NGO now, I would expect them to, work out their internal dynamics before they come out and say, well, we're ready to go, as far as fielding candidates and doing everything that political organizations do. Personally, I have said this in many fora of myself, I would love to see the day when people just compete without this whole party thing. I believe political parties have not served us well since independence. And I would like to see the region move away from political parties because our states are too small. And the kind of polarization and division that political parties cause it holds us back from growing as small states. We just don't have the kind of base to deal with that. We don't have the checks and balances to keep political parties, in on their toes and to keep them accountable when they form the government. So I would really love to see not just Grenada, but the entire Caribbean move away from that kind of structure. It hasn't worked for us at all, and I believe it's played its part, and it's time to move to something different. So yes, I believe we're going to be covering some elections. I believe we have a lot more coverage of COVID-19 to do. That is certainly nowhere near its end as far as we can see right now. We have to look at the situation in St. Vincent, and are we really learning and growing from these natural hazards? What are we doing to protect ourselves and to prepare for future hazards that may come? And I also believe that we have to look at labor issues. We're going to be looking at a lot more of that going forward, because I believe workers are taking more notice of the environment in which they work and what kind of future they're going to be leaving behind for those who come after. Of course, there will be issues that come up. We work in news, so there's always something in news that
Always
we're going to
something.
find out.
Always
Yeah,
unexpected developments.
yeah, but I believe these expected developments, we can follow them. And oh yes, and in Grenada, the Grenada issue is far from being over. So that is something to follow up. So we have all these issues to follow up, and certainly have to keep our eyes open for anything else that's going to come up on the landscape between now and the fast racing away 2021 that we're in.
Yep, we're moving quickly along. And so let me thank you, Beverly Sinclair and Kitaka Mawuto, my very, very abled brother and assistant. And let me thank the both of you for appearing on the Bubb Report. Next week, we will be looking at issues around contract labor in Grenada, contract work, the implications and significance, really, of increasing propensity for contract labor in the country. So I want to take this opportunity again to thank all our viewers and listeners for joining us for another edition of the Bubb Report. On behalf of the production team, I thank you again, and you guys have a pleasant week. Bye-bye.